Okay, so now we're going to talk about the big bad that is UVing. Um, I've heard a lot of kind of mixed opinions about UVing. Um, Most people think UVing is hard and it's terrible and everyone regrets doing UVing. It's purely because you've not been taught UVing properly. But UVing is very important. Every part of the modelling process is just as important as the bit that comes before it and what comes after it. It's all really important. You could have a stunning piece of geometry, stunning, but without good UVs, your textures are going to look terrible. But you can have a fairly mediocre model, but then with good UVs, you can bring it up with the texturing. UVs are really important. They're just unfortunately a little bit tricky to get your head around at first because they're a little bit weird. Well, not weird. They're just a bit weird to explain for people who've never done this. But we're going to have a look at a couple of initial examples of UVs. I'm going to show you something very simple, and I'm going to show you something very scary. A lot of people find it scary, but it's not at all. And then we're going to look at UVs that it relates to our environments at the minute, and show you how what we've been doing is really easy to fix up into UV and to sort out and to get ready and stuff. And then in another video, we're going to start talking about other more complex elements of stuff, but are still very easy and very important. So I'm going to grab some projects. I'm going to show them you off. So here's some good explanations about UVs. So, key points about UVs. Functions. UVs act as markers for each vertex of a 3D mesh, indicating where on a 2D texture image that vertex should be positioned. So it's a bit clunky writing. This is AI writing of explanations of UVs. Because I'll go forward, I'm terrible at explaining what UVs are. It's just something I've never been able to be good at. But I'm very good at UVing. So I'm using this as a replacement. UVs act as markers on each vertex of a 3D mesh, indicating where on a 2D texture image that vertex should be positioned when the texture is applied to the model. Long story short, what this means, this function section, is it's a sticker. Essentially, you know when you peel something off a surface, when you have a sandwich box and you kind of unwrap it and you lay it flat. If someone's done graphic design, you've done nets and that kind of stuff. It's basically just that. It's a sticker to a surface. In fact, right in front of me here, I've got a perfect example of a UV. Because I've recently just excitingly got some new toothpaste, I've got a box of Colgate. So I've got my box here. So I'm going to unpick all the sides that I can try and do it cleanly as well. Unpick the side. So this is our model. This is a cube. We've made this simple prop, and it's that shape, and we want to have this texture on it and that kind of thing. What we would do is, through the process of UVing, which is simpler than people often make it out to be, it's actually not that hard. There you go. Is we would basically start to find a UV seam or find an edge, so we can cut it to allow us to lay it out like that. That's literally a UV. There you go. That's literally a UV. The only difference from real world to to 3D world is that some of these tabs here are not needed because it's just a flat plane on the end. So really what this would look like is, I'll get rid of all the stuff we don't need. The actual geometry for this, and we'll actually probably make one in a second. Make one of these in a second. It'll look like this. So that's what the UV would look like, because you've got a plane for each side, and that one, and then all together you have that shape. So you're able to actually apply texture and whatever you need to each individual face. So on the back it would look like that. Very, very useful. So whenever you've got like a box of something, I've even got a box of like chocolate fingers here that can do the same thing. If you've got cans around you and stuff, so I've got an empty can here. I don't know how this is going to be, how obvious it's going to be on the actual webcam, but cans, unless it's got a sticker around it, this is just a cylinder. This is straight up just a cylinder with a little bit of information, but generally it's a cylinder. And what they do in production is they have this going down the line, and they basically screen print the label across it like this. And I'm not going to do this, but if you get a can, cut it down one side, you can lay it flat. Although you can kind of see what happens. I don't know if you can see that. Just at the corner there, you can kind of see where the label overlaps through that screen printing process. Again, there's everything around you. You can, if you investigate it, you might even be able to find UVs. So UVs are essentially, the function is a sticker that wraps around an object to lay on a texture. The process of UVing, to apply textures properly, 3D artists unwrap their 3D models, essentially flattening it into a 2D plane to arrange the UVs in a way that optimizes texture usage and minimizes visual seams. That's it. So that's on the can there. That's an example of real-world UV seams. You can see where they're actually overlapping, where the gold gets a little bit darker. That's UV seams overlapping. If you think about a box like this, the points where they're overlapping, or the seams, would be the point where the box meets in a corner. So that would be a box. We'd find that edge, we'd literally cut it, and then we'd unfold it. Now, we don't actually physically unfold it in a 3D, in the 3D surface, in the 3D workspace. We have a new workspace, a whole different workspace inside any software to do this. And this, again, is a process which is across all the different softwares. We all do the same things. So people who've used 3ds Max, you might have heard pelt mapping. That's just basically auto mapping in this, which it might sound good being called auto mapping, but it's not actually a good thing. It's not good if you don't know what you're doing. And why UV? Since XYZ axes are already used by the 3D space, the 2D texture coordinates are designated U and V. So you've got UV, XYZ. When I was coming up, I thought that stood for something. It doesn't stand for anything. They're literally just coordinates. So UVs are a little bit funny to understand when you first get into them, and they're a little bit funny to explain. But they are essentially the skin of an object. Paracetamol box. Tear it apart, have a look at it. Cool. So what I've done here is I've brought some basic pieces of geometry in to show you the initial UVs. So all objects are created with some form of initial UV. And through this we can also have a look at where we look at the UVs and how to access that information. So I've got some assets here: cube, cone, torus, sphere, cylinder. How do you actually see the UVs? It's very, very easy. You can either come up here where it says UV editing right here, and you'll click on that and you get a little menu, a little new set of tools that are all green, because UV, all their tools are green for color, color recognition. And then we click on this little icon here, which is like a little box with a checkerboard in it. We can click that and it opens up our UV space. The other way we can do this is by going up to the top right of the screen and dropping down to UV editing. The only difference is by going to UV editing here and opening up this guy, you get it as a floating window. Coming up here to UV editing, the whole entire workspace changes to be this UV editing workspace. So I'll just do a quick save on this, just so in case I close it accidentally. I'm going to go back to general, and I'm going to open it up through this little space here, so it's a floating menu. There we go. So this is the UV space. So you've got a lot of the same similarities here. Your navigation is all based off Alt. So Alt middle mouse is your pan, Alt right mouse is your zoom, and Alt left mouse is pan, because there is no tumble. We're literally looking at a 2D surface here, so you can't rotate around something which is in a 2D surface. So middle and left mouse just do pan, right mouse does zoom, and obviously you've got your scroll wheel to zoom as well. So what you've got here as well is a grid, and what you'll notice in the very middle, you've got these red and green lines here. This is your UV, so UV. Right here in the middle, you will see that it says 0, and if you look either side of it, you'll get increments. So you get 0, 0.1, 0.2, 0.3, 0.4, 0.5, 0.6, all the way up to 1, and then that will increase to 1.2, 3, up to 2, 3, 4. And it does the same thing going upwards, and then negative versions going downwards and going to the left. Right here, this little space is called 0 to 1. This is called 0. And this space here, so we go from 0 to positive 1 on both the U and the V axis, this is called your 0 to 1 space. This is where we actually need to put all the UVs. We can use this entire UV area, this whole cluster of boxes here. We can use this to lay everything out, and I'll show you what I'm doing with other projects in a second. You can use this whole stuff. But when for now anyway, when the UV is ready to go, all we need to do is make sure that it's in the middle here, because that's the area that is read by Substance Painter. The tool sets in here are very, very simple. We've just got, again, the drop down menus at the top, which have not as many tools, but they have tools in. And to be honest, I use a fraction of these. For the years I've been doing this, I've used a fraction of these. I've tried them all, and I found my nice tools, because some of them work, but they don't work great. And to the right, we've also got some drop-down menus that have a lot of very interesting and useful tools that are all up here anyway. They're just like a quick access menu to the side. So let's actually have a look at stuff. So I will actually go and change this to UV editing for now. There we go. So there you go. It just means it's docked to the window. So I'm going to click on this. I'll click on a cube. This is what is given to us when we first make a cube. Right there. I've got this. This is normally what you would normally see, but I've got this second little green icon right here turned on. It basically shades everything blue or red, depending on which way it's facing. It just makes it easier to see. So this is what a cube is. The general UV for a cube is like when you first make it, which is fine. All the faces are laid out, all good. There's no bad shapes or anything like that. It's all good. But the thing is about this is it's negative space. All the space around it is not being used. So you remember when we were talking about the optimization of space and all that kind of stuff? All this unused space around here, it's all data. It's all pixel data that's just not being used. So if you've got an 8K or a 4K texture and then half of that is not being used, that's literally 2K of information that's just not being used. For a cone, you've got this. So you've got the very base of it here, and then you've got the actual cone of it here. For a torus, you've got this. Now this is funny because people might think you'll have a different shape, but what has happened is it's been cut and it's been laid out into a cylinder, into a square. A sphere is this, and you might be familiar with this kind of setup if you've seen the spherical maps for globes and planets laid out, and you kind of get the kind of like weird egg shapes that are merged together. Kind of similar to that. The only difference being that at the top we've got triangles, because at the very top of a sphere they're triangles. So at the very top we've got triangles. And then you've got a cylinder, and this is what a cylinder looks like. So these are all the beginning basic UVs that you are given for when you first make a shape. We will never use these shapes as they are. Well, rarely. The only two of these shapes that I will sometimes not UV are cylinders and toruses, these two. Everything else, the UVs I change. I don't use this UV. I do not use this. Just because it's a wasted space. Wasted space. And also what I'm going to show you in a minute, some items are also not correct. They're a bit warped. So, when you first make an object, this is what you get. It gives you this. We will start affecting these pieces of geometry when we come up to it. On this UV window here, on the right hand side, I've got this little checkerboard here. Right there. Little checker icon here. If I turn that on, it applies a checkerboard over everything, which is really good. We're going to use this a lot. The main thing I use it for is just to make sure things are correct. Things aren't stretched or squashed. So this cube, for instance, is perfect. You can see the checkerboard there is absolutely perfect. There's nothing wrong with that, because it's a perfect cube. I made that by holding shift and dragging out. This torus, not great. You can see that all them, they're meant to be squares, but they're all very squashed and compact. So not great. The cylinder is okay-ish around the middle, but as you get further up to the top, you can see it gets more and more deformed. And the cylinder, the top and the bottom are perfect. Look at that. Perfect squares, perfect squares. But the middle, you can see how it's all squashed. So a lot of these, we're not going to use them. So if we look at the actual cone, that is completely banjaxed. This isn't good. At the bottom's perfect. Aside from being a massive N-gon, the bottom is actually perfect. But the rest of the cone is useless because it's kind of straight here. But as you get further around it, it becomes more and more skew with. So this is what happens when you first make an object. This is fine because we're never really going to use these objects, these UVs on the right here. You know, we're going to model into stuff, we're going to make UVs for this, we're actually going to create the UVs ourselves, which isn't very hard, but it's just a new way of thinking. Now, when we move into more complex modeling and we start affecting surfaces, these UVs get very weird. So what I'm going to do is open up a project I'm currently working on, which started off as a cube. The whole project started off as a cube, and then I've been building into it, and I'm almost done with the modeling now. Let's put that over there. But when it opens up, I thought I already had this open, to be honest. There we go. So new, and I'm going to open up. It will be in my computer. Shut up, phone. There we go. Downloads. Cassette. Okay. So like I said, this is a project that I've been working on for a little bit, and it started off, like I said, as a cube. I started the entire thing off as a cube, and I just started modeling into it to start making all these different things. Just as an insight into modeling in general, this is all not one solid shape. This is made up of lots of different shapes. So everything is, not everything, but a lot of this is individual shapes that allows me to basically model better. But let's have a look at the UVs for this. So I'll click on where should I start first? I'll show you UVs for this that have been already finished. So this tape has already been finished. The UVs for these are done. So as you can see, I've created the UVs. Now what am I actually looking at here? This is a project where I'm going to try and make this whole thing look as realistic as possible. So I've got to make sure everything's laid out. So what I've got is these two big pieces here are the stickers that would be on the front of a cassette tape from like the 80s. So these are stickers sections. Everything else, so we've got the front of the tape here, and then we've got the back of the tape here, like that. Because these tapes are also made from two separate pieces above each other, so I've made a top and a bottom. And then all the little bits. So I've got, you know, the inside of the tape there. So that section right there, that section right there, they're laid out. I've got the little bits on the inside here. So I've got the top and the bottom of this little toothy cog section right there. Separate to that, I've turned the inside of this into a long strip. So this might look like a load of stuff. You're thinking, how the hell, what am I even going to do? This is complex UVing. Intermediate UVing. It's not really complex. This is intermediate UVing. You've just got to get familiar with how shapes work, and if you've got a certain shape, break it down to its basic shape. So this internal shape here, I see that as a cylinder. And the best way to unwrap a cylinder is to be a big long strip, as if it was like a sticker that you would wrap around a surface. I see that as a big cylinder. And then these two faces, top and bottom, they're pretty much facing upwards. So what I do again is I think, okay, they're just going to be flat. So they're not physically connected, but they are. They're not physically. No, they are physically connected in the 3D world, but I lay out the UV separate in the 2D world. This is where things start to get a little bit confusing. I think this is where people start to just have that knee-jerk reaction to, oh, UV is terrible, I can't do it. No, of course you can do it. I'm showing you complex stuff. The more you UV stuff, the more complex it gets. But before you even get to UV, and this is what really freaks people out, I didn't touch the UVs of the main body of this recorder until recently. Because I've taken a cube and I've been modeling into it and stuff, the whole thing becomes a mess. Because every time you extrude, you bevel, you cut, you separate, you merge, you do all this kind of stuff, the UVs get gradually more and more messed up to the point where it becomes like an explosion. And I think people look at that and go, oh my god, what's going to happen? Blah, 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 blah. I hate UV and I can't UV. Again, knee-jerk reaction. They see a mess, can't UV. Of course you can. You just have to accept that the more complex the model, the more this is going to look weird. But then we take stuff into very easily becoming a shape, recognizable shape, easily. Now, another thing that kind of confuses people is, for me, thinking of stuff like a sticker is very easy. It's like, well, duh. because I've been doing this for so long. But a lot of people, when they first go into UVing, often can't separate. This is made of physical plastic, so they're thinking, well, it's not a sticker, so how can I think of it like a sticker? You've got to think about areas on the geometry where if this was a sticker, like a decal wrapping around something, where would you put these seams in, or would you have the cuts in? So when you are laying it over, they're the points where the sticker meets and becomes like a solid form. So I'm not even going to show you UVing this or anything inside here because it's all complex. This is probably going to take me a week to UV in chunks whenever I can find time. What I have got, or what I had, I don't know why I've not got it anymore. It's because it's in this scene. I've got something I made very, very quickly, and it's just a crate. It's a very, very simple crate. This is what you would have been making last year. So the first things I get my first year's making is literally this. In one lesson, we make a crate and we UV it. So if I actually look at this crate as just a piece of geometry, well, there we go. Actually, you know what? Let's make this crate. So this crate is a cube. So what I'm going to do is make a cube. Make a cube. Make a cube. There we go. I'm going to make a cube. And then each one of these faces, I'm going to extrude in, then extrude down to make with this recess. And all I've got to do is just remember the numbers. So I click face. I click extrude. I start to bring in the offset. So I'm going to make this 38. Maybe 40. Yeah. So I'll bring it in 40. So I'll do that. So that's on this one. I'm going to extrude this one in. Offset by 40. Do this face, offset by 40. And I am going about this long before anyone says there is a much quicker way of doing this. I am going about this the long way to show you, the repetition of tools. So what I'm doing is I'm extruding the face in every time. Just making it 40 off the offset. 40 in the offset to bring it in. There we go. And then if I just shift click each one of these internal faces so I can do them all at the same time. If I extrude now, I can then push all them faces in. And there we go, I've made a crate. I've made a very, very simple, in a game that's totally readable as a crate. Very, very simple. The UVs for these, however, are appear to still be identical to a normal cube like that. However, what's happened is, because I've been extruding, there are technically faces hidden away and stuff. So what I need to do, again, I'm just ignoring the fact that this exists. I'm going to make my own UVs. So UVing is another step-by-step process, and like that definition says, it's creating it's creating stickers to wrap around a surface to create texture on. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to create the UVs for this in here and explain what I'm doing while I'm doing it and why I'm doing it. So number one, I want to make the UVs for the recess here, for the recess inside this crate. Just turn the checkerboard off so it's not in my face. There we go. I'm going to make a UV for the inside of this as well as the faces going around the side here. So I'm going to make this into one UV island, we call it. This one UV island. How I do that? It's very, very simple. I'm going to do this the long way again so you understand how to do this. I'm going to grab the top face. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a picture. We call this projecting. I'm going to project this plane off into its own little UV space. So I'm going to go to create in my UV space because I'm creating a projection. And some of this terminology might not be familiar, but what I'm going to do is do a planar projection. In this world, a planar projection is a flat projection. Flat projection. And I know I'm looking down at this object, so I'm looking down the y-axis doing a planar projection. So what I'm going to do is planar. I'm going to go to the option box. So whenever you see an a tool inside Maya and you see a little box to the right of it, that's called an option box. So I'm going to go to planar option box, and all I'm going to do is turn two settings on. I'm going to turn axis Y on, so that means I'm looking down at the object, so I'm turning that on. And then if it's turned off, mine's turned on because I always keep it turned on. Keep image width height ratio turned on. I'm going to keep that turned on. And then what I'm going to do is hit apply, because I'm going to be doing this a few times. I'm going to hit apply. And you see now this whole grid gets filled with a UV. There you go. That whole surface at the top there, it gets projected into that area. And you can see there's like a little grey frame inside here. You'll see this a lot when we're UVing, when we're projecting. Think of that as a camera. This is literally taking a picture. This frame's taking a picture of the object. And then what I'm going to do is just move it out of the way. This is what I do. Whenever I project something, I move it out of the way to the side. So that's that top plane projected right there. I'm going to go down to the bottom of my crate. I'm going to select that face. I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to go create a planar projection, because I'm looking at a flat surface that's facing directly into an axis. So that's going to be a flat plane. Planar. So again, make sure that it's set to y-axis. This is why I've not closed this window, because I can just keep it open. It's set to y-axis, keep image width height ratio, apply, there we go. Now this one's red. Why is this one red? Because we take a picture looking down at an object, like this. When we take a planar, it looks down at it. In this case anyway, it's looking down from the y-axis. So the face on top is facing towards the camera, which means it's going to be blue. What this face is doing is facing away from the camera, so it turns in red. It doesn't mean it's broken or anything, it just means it's literally facing away. For now, that's fine. I'm going to leave it like that for now. Cool. So I'll just hide the rest of this guff. Cool, so we've done the top plane and we've done the bottom plane. We've got them laid out. Literally all I'm doing there is planar projection, taking a picture of them down that axis. What I'm going to do now is do the x-axis sides. So again, in face mode, I'm going to grab the x-axis on this side. So making sure I'm looking down on my left-hand side, just behind my head here. Obviously you've got your, there we go, your axis gimbal down there. So I'm going to grab that plane. And then in this settings, what I'm going to do is change it to x-axis. Planar project. There we go. Move that to the side. Go to the other side. Grab that face. X-axis, planar project like that. So again, we're getting that red face because one's going to be facing towards the camera and it's blue, and then one's facing away from the camera, so it's red. And we'll just move those two to the side. So now we'll do the z-axis, so one's facing forward and backwards. So I'll look at my gimbal, I'll grab the front face, and again I'll change my settings here to z-axis this time, apply. I've taken a picture of that face and it's removed it, so I'll move it to the side, and I'll grab the face at the back, apply, and move to the side. Awesome, so we've taken a picture of all 6 of the big sides there. Obviously there's a few more faces left behind, but that's fine. Now what you might have noticed then is while I'm doing it is all the blue faces are gradually disappearing from this, because what I'm doing is I'm taking that blue face from that initial layout and I'm reprojecting it. I'm creating a UV and it literally removes it from that. But what we're doing, what we're looking at here is what's left behind, and that's all the extrusions we did at the beginning. So now we can't necessarily grab a face that we want because we can't see him. It's hard to do that now. So what we're going to do is do the exact same thing using the X, Y, Z options here, but we're going to do it around the outside frames here. So the outsides of the frames. So what we'll get is like a little picture frame. So we'll do that again from the y-axis. Start with that one from the top. Grab that one. Select all them faces around the top, not the ones on the inside. And then we'll project. So create, planar, project, y-axis, apply, boom. So move that to the side. Over here. I'll go to the bottom, do the same thing. So grab all the faces on the bottom around that frame. Apply. There we go. So now we've taken a planar projection from both the top and the bottom frame sections. And what you will notice as well is near the end, the little white lines on this will start to disappear because we're starting to basically get all the faces projected. We'll do the x-axis now, so grab these faces on the x-axis, change it to x, apply, boom. Go to the other side, grab these, apply. And you'll notice that what used to be a red frame turns into a blue frame sometimes, because that's facing towards the camera. So it was a red face before because we were looking at the UVs are basically messed up, but we're technically looking down like a pixel size version of the UV. It was tiny. It was unusable. Sometimes they say red because the same thing. Sometimes they stay red because, as I was saying before, we're taking a picture from one side, so one side's going to be facing the camera, it turns blue. The other side's facing away from the camera, so it turns red. And then we just go through and carry on, do all the things. So now this is a z-axis, so we change to z, apply, that's our z-axis right there. And we go to the other side, do, apply, there we go. Awesome. Fantastic. So now that's all the frames done. And the only thing that's left is the little faces on the inside here. Now, I'm not going to go through and do every one of those individually. What I'm going to do is grab all the ones that are facing down the z-axis, negative or positive. I'm going to grab all those at the same time, and the y and the z, all that kind of stuff. So, oops, a daisy, don't do that. So I'll just move this option box to move the monitor. So my z-axis is that direction. So that's facing down the z-axis, just in the opposite direction. It's facing negative z. This one across the way is facing positive z. So I'll grab both of those and I'll go to the other side. So this one here is facing positive z, so I'll grab that one. And this one here is facing negative z, so I'll grab that one. Again, use that axis gimbal down there. And what I'll do is I'll z-axis, apply, and there we go. So I'm wondering, yeah, we're starting to get some of these white lines disappearing now because we're starting to actually get these faces off and projecting. And for now, I'm just going to move these to the side. I'm going to move these to the side. Don't worry them that they're not even red or blue, they're purple. Don't worry about that. We'll explain that in a bit. So now I'm going to do the x-axis. So, okay, let's look. Okay, so this is the z-axis. So, there we go. So I want to grab all the faces that are facing away or towards the z-axis. So I'll get that one. Over to the other side, that one, and that one. So you can see, even though it's yellow, it just means I've clicked it. It's not blue or it's not green. So that means the z-axis. So anything facing towards or away from the z-axis, we're good. So what I'll do, see, x-axis, sorry, not z-axis. I change this to the x-axis, apply, there we go. Move that here. And then really all that's left should just be the y-axis, because we've done all the faces on the inside, all these big faces, we've done all three axes. All the frames going around the outside, we've done all three axes. And then we've done the first two axes of the little inside frames here. So it stands to reason that the only faces that are left are the ones that are facing positive x and y. Oh, but I've made a mistake. This is an honest mistake actually. I forgot to do the top and the bottom at the same time, so I'm actually going to have to go back and quickly, oops-a-daisy, grab these. So I'm just going to grab all the stuff going down the x-axis as well as the top. I completely forgot about that then. Oops-a-daisy. This is why practice is always good. But also just keeping a cool head. You know, these things are going to happen. And the great thing about UVs that people come to understand is if you make a mistake with UVs, you don't have to delete the UVs. You just reproject it. UVs are so simple to do that if you make a mistake, it's like 2 clicks away from being fixed. You've just got to keep a cool head. So no panicking. So I've got these axes, cool. I've got to, right now I'm going to project them. So x-axis project, bang. That's better. Okay, that's much better. Okay, so I've got all the sides that are facing positive, negative z, x. Now I'll do Z. Right, so all the Z's now, so same jazz. Boom, 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 boom. So they're all facing positive, and then all the negatives. Boom, 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 boom. There we go. So now we should project those, and we should have the exact same thing. Z, project. Yep, there we go. And they're purple, which is good. And now all that should be left is the y-axis stuff. So I'm going to change that to y-axis, project. There we go. So I've made that look easy, but might not have made it sound easy, because you've really got to understand your axes at the beginning when you're doing this kind of stuff. You've really got to understand your axes, but then you've also got to keep a clear head. And this is why I'm going on about puzzles all the time, shape-based puzzles. You're never going to learn this through playing COD. You're never going to learn this through playing Siege or Roblox or anything like that. You need to do stuff which is going to help you see shapes and puzzles and this kind of stuff. You need to be doing this kind of stuff if you want to get good at it. So, what have I done there? So I've made my cube, I've made my object. Now I've used this specific object because there are no weird angles. Everything is a 90-degree angle. So it's either going to be facing directly down the y-axis, directly down the z-axis, or directly down the x-axis. There's no other ways it can happen. And all I've done is grabbed all the faces that are going down the x-axis, projected those off, done a planar projection because they're all flat. Planar projection. All the faces that are facing on the z-axis, planar projection, done. Y-axis, planar projection, done. And I've just done them in chunks. So I've done all the big faces first, and then I've done the next one down, so the medium faces, and then I've done the small faces. This is forcing me to keep using the tools. When we get in, if you get your head into this and you actually get good, which you all will get good at UVing, we'll start to kind of take shortcuts, kind of, ish. When I UV stuff properly nowadays, so especially for this kind of stuff, I'm not necessarily selecting all the y-axis or the z-axis. I'm going to come in and I'm going to do a thing that makes a mess, and then I'm going to take this mess and I'm going to make it a bit more organized, and I'm going to kind of like go from that super mess to a bit of a mess to a bit cleaner, bit cleaner, bit cleaner, and I'm going to go down these stages. Because again, I've been doing this for years, so I know what I'm doing. But to train, to learn, we take it simple. Okay, so what have we got? We've got a load of blue shapes and we've got a load of red shapes. The red shapes are faces that are facing away from that axis when we took that picture, and the blue faces are faces pointing towards that axis. Easy. Now, fixing these is really easy because all we need to do is flip it. We just literally need to just flip it. And luckily, there is a really good function for that. And generally, whenever you do anything, you change, you modify, you alter a UV, what you're doing is you're modifying it. So you need to go to modify, and most of our stuff is in here. And luckily there is an option far down called flip. So I'm going to go to UV shell. I'm going to grab a face like this one, for instance. I'm going to grab this one, this red face. I'm going to modify. I'm going to go to flip. Now it's blue because literally I've flipped it. I go to this one, modify, flip. Oops, a daisy. Flip, modify, flip. So that's them done. They're all now blue. I'm going to come to my frames. Slap that one, modify, flip. Slap that one, modify, flip. Slap that one, modify, flip. So I've flipped them. Easy. The last one is, I'll do a quick save, is these guys. Now these are purple because this red and blue is additive. This isn't a solid colour, so if I was to get a red UV and move it on top of the blue UV, you get purple. The more blue UVs you have on top of each other, the darker it gets. So as you can see, if I'm like that blue there is getting darker and darker and darker because I'm stacking all these blues on top of them. It's just additive. Same for the red, it'll get darker and darker red. So it stands to reason, you put blue on top of red, you get a purple. These are all really good things when you're looking and debugging UVs to see if anything's overlapping or if anything's facing the wrong way. Red UVs aren't always needing to be fixed as well. Sometimes you will have to have flipped UVs for specific reasons that we're not going to be touching just yet. Now these ones, they're purple because they're overlapped each other. So all I'm going to do is go to UV shell, Just click it and move it. Click it, move it. Click it, move it. Click it, move it. And all I'm going to do is literally do what I did before. I'm just going to expose the red from the blue. Taking my time carefully. I'm not going to try and speed run this. There we go. So I've exposed the red from the blue. And all I'm going to do now is just go through and modify, flip. I'm going to introduce one tool to you in this video, and if you watch this video, this is your little nugget, your little spoiler, your little Easter egg. If you're using a tool in Maya a lot, say flip, if I know I'm going to be flipping a bunch of stuff, if I press G after I've used the tool, that's going to repeat the tool. So I'm going to go to this red icon here, this red UV here, modify flip. If I grab another red one and then press G for flip, well, G to repeat last tool, it'll flip. So G, repeat last tool. G, repeat last tool. So again, select this, I go to modify flip, and then I can select the next one, G. Select the next one, G. And it just repeats what I've just done. So this is your nice little Easter egg. If people don't watch the video, they won't know that. It's like G to repeat last tool. Super good. So there we've got this. Okay, so we've got a lot of stuff going on. It's starting to all be blue, which is good. Everything looks to be, you know, laid out properly. If we just turn on this checkerboard again, we're going to look to see if we've got any skewed pinched geometry. And like everything should be perfect squares, which by the looks of it, it is. Perfect. And that's what we want. That's half the battle right there. If all our squares on this checkerboard are square, we're all good. As we go through, we're going to have some stuff which unfortunately just cannot be perfectly square because weird shapes. When you come to do characters, characters are never a perfect square shape because we're all soft form and wobbly and bumply. But this, because it's all right angles, you're going to get perfect squares across everything. We're not done though, because as these explanations have explained, to apply textures properly, 3D artists unwrap their 3D models, essentially flattening it into a 2D plane to arrange the UVs in a way that optimizes texture usage and minimizes visual seams. Optimizes texture usage means we want to make sure that we're utilizing as much of the UV space as we can, and minimizes UV seams, which means we need to hide gaps. Another thing to look at as well is at the very bottom of the screen here. I don't know how well that's going to come out in the recording, but on yours, look at the bottom of the screen here. You'll see UV shells, UV overlapping, and reversed UVs. So, for instance, I've got 4 UVs that are reversed because of this geezer. He carries 4 UVs because he's got 4 corners. He's got 4 essentially vertexes. They're not actually vertexes, but again, this is weird. Like in the 3D world, we have vertexes. In the UV world, we have UVs. But you can still do select vertexes inside here, but just don't do it. But what I'm more concerned about is where it says at the bottom here 1. So I've not got any selected. So there you go. 0-36 UV shells. That means there are 36 separate UV shells in this. And one of the kind of like tasks we have in UVing is bringing that number down as much as possible without making really bad UVs. Now, luckily, something like this is very easy to fix because what I'm going to do is sew things together. I'm going to sew certain UVs together so we're losing the separation. If we look at the 3D object here, all the thick white lines are where UV seams are. All the thin blue lines are where the UVs are connected, they're sewn together. And the only point they're happening is in the corners of these frames because they're actually connected. So it's one of my jobs is to think about the easiest place to put these seams in, to sew stuff together, and where I'm going to have seams that separate. That's my job. That's where, again, puzzles, shape language, jigsaws, Sudoku, whatever. So, contrary to what you might do in the real world, this is also where I keep saying I keep talking about backwards logic. This is where the 3D world gets things. We do things differently. If we really think about this in the real world, this plank here is one piece of wood. So you'll have your top piece of wood and your side piece of wood, like that. Unfortunately, in the 3D world, things don't really work like that. We don't work in physical things like that. So if I'm having these frames be frames, technically, what I should be doing is sewing. I'll show you how to sew in a minute, so don't worry about that. We technically should be sewing these smaller faces into there because they're technically part of the same object. But what happens is we end up overlapping those on the edges there. It's that overlapping. There we go. So you start overlapping. So you can see, as we were saying before, these blues and reds are additive. So it gets darker here because you've got these two edges overlapping. In this case, overlapping UVs aren't good because it means that they're going to be pulling the exact same texture from each other. And in the corners of your box, what you're going to have is a really nasty, weird UV texture thing happening, where you'll be pulling the UV texture from one to the other. So what I do, the way that I do these kind of things is by still minimizing the amount of UV shells we've got and minimizing the amount of UV seams we've got. But what else is connected to this small face physically? Well, it's this here. And if we think about, well, if we just look at the object, if we observe the object, this edge here is exactly the same length as this edge here. It means that this is going to give us a nice little shape. So what I'm going to do is, so this is how you sew stuff together. You sew edges together. So again, we can have to say it out loud. We sew edges. So we sew edge. I have to be in edge mode. So you grab an edge, cut and sew, modify, cut and sew, and then move and sew. If we just did sew, this would happen. It starts to make a really weird shape. We don't want to do that. That's because it's not taking the entire shape from one to the other. It's just moving this edge down to the other one, which is not great. So instead what we do is cut and sew. Sorry, move and sew. This one. Move and sew. So you can see that face there. And you can tell these two belong to each other because as I move around a shape, you'll see that at the bottom there, you'll see little red lines appearing on the little shapes and the little strips. Because that's basically saying these two edges belong to each other. So I don't know if you can see those little red edges appearing. There's one right there. So if you look right there, there's a little red edge appears. So that's basically saying those two edges belong to each other. So if I sew that edge on, so it's this piece of this piece of UV here. So cut and sew, move and sew. You see it disappears and moves up to here. So we've sewn it on. And what I can do is select an edge. Move and sew as my last used tool. Press G. Or I can go, select an edge, cut and sew, move and sew. Sometimes it looks like it disappears, but what it happens is it just chooses to move the bigger shape to the other shape. So, boom, that's what's happened there. So, I select an edge, cut and sew, move and sew. Cut and sew, move and sew. Cut and sew, move and sew. There you go, so that's two pieces done. So we've sewn these small pieces onto this bigger piece, and it gives us quite a nice little profile because the only thing that's wrong about this is the fact that in the corner we've got a little bit of excess wasted space in this tiny little area here. But if we were to put this inside a frame and make it a little bit small like this, you can see that we're actually really utilizing that space as much as we can, because the middle of that frame is just empty. There's nothing there so far, so we could use that. So I can go through there and just literally grab all those edges, because I know each one of those edges corresponds to a bunch of things down here. Grab all those edges, cut and sew, move and sew, boom. So there it is. Grab all these two edges, cut and sew, move and sew. And then last one, cut and sew, move and sew. Boom, there you go. So as you can see, as I'm working on a bigger piece, that's what I'm going to be concentrating on mainly. I'm going to be concentrating on my big pieces and sewing onto those. you'll see that this little cluster of smaller pieces gradually disappears. So if I grab all the edges around this geezer, cut and sew, move and sew, boom, start disappearing. I'm just going to do all 4 of these at the same time because they're all exactly the same thing, you know. That's why this shape is really nice. This kind of object is really nice to work on to understand UVs, because it's 6 sides that have the exact same thing happen on each one of them. So cut and sew, move and sew. Boom. There we go. Done. Easy. Now all we have to do is get all these kind of laid out a bit better, because we've got everything scattered around the UV space here. Everything's kind of scattered around. Nothing is actually in the texture space. So here, this lighter grey area, that's where we actually need everything to be. Another thing I'm going to do is make sure that this is, again, utilizing, optimizing the texture space as much as possible. So roll back the video. You can do all this again. You can make this whole object again and again. In fact, I might get you doing this in class. I don't know. So what I'm going to do is make sure that I'm getting the right side to the right frame. So I know that these two belong to each other. But then I'm also going to lay this stuff out so that we can start to arrange this in a proper texture space. And what I'm going to do at first is start stacking these on top of each other. Again, each one of these sides is identical. There's no long sides, short sides, no wobbly bits. Everything's perfect. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab one of these frames. I don't even need to look at my 3D space that much as well for this. So I'll make it as small as I can. So grab one of my frames, like that one, and I'm going to hold X and drag it. See if it fits inside there. Or, in fact, what's best to do actually is just bring it so it's hovering over this space. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to normalize it to the UV space. Normalizing basically just crushes it to fill that space. Luckily, this is a perfect square. Therefore, it's going to fit this square perfectly. So I'm going to go to Modify, Normalize, put it in there. And I can do that for each one of these frames. So I'll grab each one of them, bring it over. Normalize was my last used tool, so I can press G, and it does it. Or I can do it the old-fashioned way, drag it over, modify, normalize. So I'm going about this the long way as well. I'm going slower. I've done a bit of explanation at the beginning, but I can quickly get this stuff working very, very fast. You know, if I did this from start to finish, building the object to get to the end product, it literally takes me 5 minutes. It's a very, very quick process once you know what you're doing. And in fact, after I've done this, I will show you how I go about it at speed to show you how simple it is. So I'm going to do the exact same thing for these inside bits. So I'm going to bring one over. I'm going to normalize it like that. It is overlapping on the outside, but don't worry about it. Bring it over. Press G to repeat last used tool, which is normalize. Or modify, if you keep forgetting G, modify, normalize. Modify, normalize. So what's happening here is I've basically, all the insides, I've normalized it to the grid, so they're all the way up to the edge. And all the frames I've normalized, so they're all the way up to the grid. However, they're obviously overlapping on the outsides there. You can see how they're overlapping. Not great. So what I'm going to do is just drag a small selection box over the very middle of it here. And that just means I'm just grabbing all the inside faces there. So you can see in the 3D world that I'm only grabbing the inside faces, which is good, not the frame. And then I'm just going to scale it down. You know, Q, W, E, and R still work in this world. We've still got movement, we've still got rotate, and we've still got scale. So what I'm going to do is just scale this down until it's just smaller than the frame like that. Perfect. And then I'm going to arrange this in a grid of 4 for here. So what I'm going to arrange them in a grid of 4 first. I might as well do it. So I'm going to grab that UV, hold X, drag it off to the side, then grab that one. So I've got UV shell selected as well, so it's going to grab a whole UV section, a whole UV shell, or an island, like that. Hold X, drag it down, so it's like that. And then just grab another one. one more. Like that. Cool. So now I've arranged them in a grid of 4. Now that's important because we don't have rectangle textures. We have square textures. But unfortunately, you can't fit 6 squares into a square, because that's mathematically impossible. You can fit 4 squares into a square. You can fit 16 squares into a square, but you can't fit 6 squares into a square, or 8 squares into a square. They have to be rectangles. So what I'm going to do is allow some of these to be overlapped. So if I do this and this, so these, there you go. These two, okay, these 3 sides here are all overlapping. That's fine. In this purpose, it's fine. So I'm going to grab everything. I'm going to move it so it's over the top of this grey space, and I'm going to normalize it again. So then each one of these is now fitted into the grid all the way perfectly. The utilization of space is amazing by doing this, because the only wasted space is this tiny gap in between the frame and the interior, and then this little square section here. Tiny, tiny gap. Yes, we have some that are overlapping each other, but if we think about games that are online, or we think about games that use sprites, or if we think about any really low, like pixel games for instance, perfect example. Minecraft is the best example for this. That entire, the original one anyway, the entire game's textures was on I think it was like a 1K by 1K texture sheet, and they would use sprites, so they would call basically sprite positions for different bits of geometry. So it means all the UVs for the grass were all over top of each other, they're all laying over, and you might have millions of those stacked on top of each other. That's fine, because what I could do with this, when I textured this, I could have a blank wooden section here, I could have this be a bit of branding, I can have this one be a different kind of side, and have this one be a different kind of side, and all I need to do is basically grab a UV and move it to where I want it to be. And that's the UV done. That's you know, like I said, this is the first thing they did in class 1 last year. So I'm going to have the exact same thing as this. I'm just going to do it a quicker way. Not a quicker way, just quicker. I'm still pretty much going to be doing the exact same thing. I'm just going to be, through experience, skipping a couple of steps. So number 1, I want a cube, so I'm going to make a cube. And then I'm going to select all the faces, and I'm going to hit extrude. And then I'm going to keep faces off, because then each one of these faces will offset individually, like that. If I keep that on, it means all the faces are going to offset as one big shape, which is not what I want. So keep all the faces off, so I can bring it in. And then I'm going to extrude again, and I'm going to bring all the thickness in. That's all the pieces done. 3 clicks to make that. Cool. So then what I'm going to do is something called an automatic unwrap, which is not a quick way of doing something and then we just leave it as it is. For an object like this, it's great because, again, all the different angles are 90 degrees. There's no weird shapes. But this just gives me this mess. But what I've really got here is what I had before when I did things individually. Because now all I need to do is just select all the edges going around these little squares. Cut and sew, move them on there. And then I just modify, normalize everything. So scale down. Get this cross section. This side. Get this cross section. In fact, I don't even need to do that. Do that. Drag it down. That. Drag it down. Grab all that. Move to the middle. Normalize done. I think that might have been either just under a minute or just over a minute. Quick. So obviously I'm doing that fast to make a point. When you're dealing with very simple geometry like this, it's very because there's no rotations on this, there's no weird angles. Everything is a 90-degree angle, which means that whole process is really easy to do. The more complex the object, the more UVing you have to be aware of, the more you have to kind of take your time over the UVing. So that's very simple, but if we go back to the tape recorder, as you can see, some stuff isn't as simple. You know, I'm having to think about the way I'm going to deal with things that are essentially a cylinder. So why don't I just do this entire like cog piece here as one thing. Why am I doing this as three separate objects? Well, it's because I'm thinking about how this can be efficiently UV'd. Where can I save on any kind of like stretching or any kind of like warping? What are the really simple shapes going on? Well, yeah, we've got a cylinder. Got a cylinder in the middle, and then we've got a flat plane on top. Simple. Areas where let's do this. There you go. Areas where I might want to have physically different textures. So the reason why I didn't keep that sticker section as part of the main UV, so I could have sewed this guy to the inside of here. As you can see, they relate to each other. So why didn't I have this sewn onto this? Well, I want this to be paper. This is going to be paper, and this is going to be plastic. So I want those physically separated from each other so that when I'm texturing, I don't have bleed. And then I've got things like, you might not be able to see them because they're inside. I've got little like tape reels on the inside. I've got my little tape reel there that I've got to make into a cube. I've got information like this little like it was like a little foam thing that would push the tape reel up to be read by the magnets. So I've got that, and then I've got my little bits. I've got these little registry markers at the top of the tape. So this is similar to what we just had with the crate there, where we've got a recess and we've got right angles most of the time. But what I've done here is essentially done the same thing. I've unfolded everything, made sure everything was nice and straight and square, if it is a square, and then I sewed everything together. I didn't sew anything to the corner here because that is a right angle. These three edges are all right angles, so I'm not going to make this into a shape like that because that's not the shape. You know, you see. If actually, I'll do a bad thing and just scale this up a little bit. Whoop. There we go. So as you can see there, they're all perfectly square, which is good. We like that. If I was to sew that corner together, that corner right there, you'll see that those become messy and skewed, and I don't want that. And, you know, as you get more and more comfortable with UVing, you'll get to understand where we can separate, where we should separate stuff off, where to put seams, where we can bend stuff, where we can't bend stuff, efficient use of UV space, and then other technical things like textile density and all this kind of jazz. It all sounds like crazy science that you're never going to be able to pick up. And if you keep telling yourself that you're never going to be able to understand it, fine, that's your loss. I believe everyone can understand this. If I can do it, you can do it. UVing is just a bit weird, like I said, but no one's been taught UVing properly. But that's why we're starting with our simple geometry. So all this being said, we're up to an hour now. All that being said, this is UV and all this kind of jazz. Let's actually UV stuff from our scene. Boom. Okay, so let's actually have a look at some of the UVs. Okay, so let's grab the floor. Well, hey, that's cool. Look at that. That flooring is pretty much perfect. Pretty much perfect. For now, it's perfect, but there are some things that we might come back and do later on. But what's really happened with this floor? Well, we've got a top place there, top plane, and then we've got a bottom plane there. And they're probably going to be sharing the exact same texture. We've only made it thick because light then can't pass through it, and if we need to see the underside of something. But because we made that from a perfect square, when I make a perfect square, so I'll hold shift, drag out a plane, that's the UVs for it. The UVs are already done. You know, so that's perfect. That's, you know, awesome. What happens if I take it, cut it down the middle, and then cut that side that I don't want off? It does the UVs for me. So all that information is still there for me, which is awesome. So as you can see, a lot of this stuff is really simple to fix up. Some of it, though, I've been building, not an inefficient way, I'd say, but not the way I've been showing you. Maybe I've done it for a reason. So this big old plane, both for the walls and the floor, are perfect. because they're just flat squares, perfect squares. Anything like this here, which isn't a perfect square, this obviously needs a bit of work, but we've just done it, haven't we? So to get a basic UV for this down, all we need to do is, well, it's facing up and down the y-axis. So I'm going to go do a planar because it's flat as well. So planar, y-axis, I'm done. The only thing I'm going to do now is just D and V this into the bottom left corner, X, snap it to the middle of the grid. Like that. Exactly the same. And that just means it's going to be reading from the same position. Same for this one. Well, this one's actually already done. This one is, yep, that's fine. And this one, so this is the quarter one. So if I was to do a planar projection on this one, I would literally get this anyway. But these are two different sizes, aren't they? This one is literally half the size of this. So I need this to be half the size. Well, how do I do that? It's very easy. Very, very easy. If I just grab the UVs, so I'm going to hold in right click because it's a context menu just like everything else. I'm going to grab the UVs at the top. I'm going to hold X and I'm going to drag it down. And what I'm looking for is that 0.5. So that's 0.6 there and that's 0.5 right there. So boom. That's the halfway height. I'll do the the right hand side. Do the same thing. Drag it. There we go. So now what I've got is that. However, I do that if I know that I want this piece of geometry to take a quarter of the texture that will be on this one. Because the texture that's probably going to be on this is like a 2K texture, or even a 4K, you know. This will be a big texture. This, because it's only a 2 meter by 2 meter, 2 meter by 2, yeah, 2 meter by 2 meter. This might only take a 2K texture. In that case, I will actually need it to be a full UV sheet. This is where, again, this is where it gets a little bit weird. Because you've never done it before, that's why it's weird. But other stuff like, so, this window here. For basic UVing, all I need to do is just do a planar projection down the Z-axis of this. There you go. Forgot where I was for a second then. Planar projection Z-axis. For now, you know, again, this is basic UVing. Why I'm saying for now as well is some of these objects have places like this. We have insides. So when we come to texture this, we might have a really nice concrete or like a wallpaper texture for this. But then on the insides here, because what we're seeing is literally like a pixel. That face right there is this pixel line right there. So what's going to happen here is you're going to get stretched pixels. It's literally just going to be straight lines. So you're not actually going to have any texture there. So we will eventually be bringing these off, laying them out. But again, just for the beginning bit, we're just going to do basic UVs. Lay them out. And the only thing I'm going to do on each of them is just make sure that they're being snapped to the bottom left corner. That's all I'm doing. Or in this case, you know, this is half a wall height, so I'm just going to drag that down to the middle. That's a full wall, that's fine. This one needs to get dragged to the middle. This is my little quarter wall. So again, same thing. This might be taking the exact same texture that's on this wall, or it might take half of it. So what I'm going to do is just, yeah, I'm going to make this half and half. And obviously I'm holding X when I'm snapping to grid there. That's a full one. This one, you know, planar project Z axis. Douche, done. So if I go into Unreal, here we go. I'm going to my materials, and just for now I'm going to delete all my materials. There we go. I'm only doing it so I can see the UVs. So I go to unlit, so you can, there we go. So you can see the UVs there. Some of the UVs on this are going to be really long and stretched. Some are going to be square. Some of them are going to be wonky. So let's see if I can find a wonky UV. There we go. So this half wall here, you can see that those squares are compact there, because same thing for our checkerboard. This is essentially what this checkerboard is doing. It's showing you the structural integrity of the object. Those are really squashed. And what is that? That's my half wall in it. Wall 2x6. So I've done that. I've gone in and just planar projected that on my wall 2x6. Planar projected z-axis. Put it in the bottom left corner there. And I'm just going to bring it to the middle of the world again. Make sure I am actually in the middle of the world. There we go. And I'm going to export this selection, my 2x6. 2x6, there you go. Or 2x4. I don't know why I've got 2x6. 2x4. So I've exported that. So if I come back into Unreal, go to my geometry folder, find my 2x4 wall, and I'm going to re-import this, and you're going to see those checkerboards sort themselves out. So I've sorted the UVs out on that. This one is a solid grey because the UVs are completely knackered on it. But like I said, I've just fixed those UVs, haven't I? So I will find that piece of geometry right there, bring it to the middle of the world, export that selection. That's my double door, double override. So double door, and again, when I import this, you're going to see, boom, my UVs are back and perfect-ish. You see, it gets wonky. This is what I'm talking about. You see how it's really stretched on the inside here? That's what I'm talking about, but we'll fix that up later on. So if your UVs are crap at this point, don't worry about it. You know, we're going to fix all this stuff up. Trying to find places where there you go. Same for the floor stuff. So my floor stuff, you know, if I just export and override all this again. So what's this? This is my. Oh, let me open my outline so I can see what I'm selecting. 2x4 floor. Floor 2x4. Floor 4x2. My full floor is fine, and my floor 2x2. That'll be fine anyway. Then again, back in Unreal, I'm just going to re-import everything. And again, what you're going to see is this is still going to stay the same size. But in fact, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to do a full version of this and a not full version. So this is going to be a 2K texture. This one's literally going to be a half version of this. Half size version of that. So bring it to the middle. I'm just going to change those UVs. There we go. I'm going to export this. Now this is, oh god, what do I call this? SM floor 2x2 small. I'm going to go 2x2 small. So I'm going to drag that in because obviously that's a new import, a new export. So I'm going to have to drag that in when I can find my project. Project. There you go. Scenes. Too small. So drag that in. Yes. Now what I did before, obviously, you know, this is my 2x2 floor, but I'm going to drag my 2x2 floor over the top of that static mesh and replace it. So now you can see that that has updated and it's got the right textile density, got the right size. So we've not got a small version next to a big version. We've got two perfect UVs. And this one again, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to re-import everything and you'll see this one update to be correct. Apparently not. Oh, because I made a boo-boo. Exported it from all the way over there. So, you know, I made a bit of a mistake then, but some people might be like, oh, I've got to delete it. No, just literally re-export it. What's that? 2x4. 2x4. Let me back. And I believe I also did that with that one as well, so I'm going to bring that one into the middle of the scene to export it. There you go. That's all. That's the only thing I made a mess of then. Where's my 3x2? There we go. So I'll re-import again, and everything will jump back into position, as you will see very quickly. There you go. And all the UVs are perfect. All them checkerboards are perfect. There's no... Oh, besides the pillars, but I've not done them yet. All perfect. Now, what we will be looking at some point is when things like my pillars, they might be 6 foot, they might be 8 foot tall. That's obviously breaking outside of this. So if my big floor section is 4x4 and my wall is 4x4, the biggest versions, obviously if I start cramming a 8 foot tall UV into that little square, it means the UVs are going to be smaller, which means you'll have more detail on the big object, like my walls, and then less detail on my bigger objects that have been made smaller. These things we're going to work out. A lot of this I'm just covering over the basics, and then we're going to see examples of this as we do it. UVing is a lot of you've got to do it to understand it, in my opinion. But that's the extent of the UVing we're going to do for this, because that's all we really need to do. It's just making sure these are all okay, so that we can start getting basic stuff into Unreal, into Substance Painter, and get basic textures done, learn that. Because then we're going to learn about stuff like trim sheeting and atlas mapping, where we will be creating multiple sections of material on one thing, and then that's when you have to start to split up the material or split up the UVs. But for now, I'm going to leave it like that. This is it's one of them big broad overviews. But for us, a lot of it is just what is the angle of the object, what is the majority of that object facing. If it's x-axis, x-axis. If it's z-axis, z-axis. Planar projection, that's the only thing we've done so far as well. We've only used planar projection. We've not used cylindrical, which in my opinion is useless, and we've not used spherical, which is awesome, just not for this. For what we're currently doing anyway. And I made that crate as well, going from start to end, both those crates, which are pretty much bang on. Oh, they're so close to each other as well. So I made both these crates, one the very quick way and one that longer way, but it's using all the tools and it's understanding how to think about, well, if this face is facing that area and that face is facing that direction, how to split it up, all that kind of jazz. UVing is going to be a little bit difficult to get your head around. It's not technically, physically difficult. It's not mathematically difficult. It's just a very weird concept to get your head around, but you can all do it. And the last thing I always say, the last thing I want to hear is, I can't do this. You can absolutely do it. So I'm going to leave it there, because I've done a full day of recording and my voice is, if you can hear it, getting a bit tired. We'll be doing UVs and materials next on the stuff that we've made so far. So yeah, looking forward to it.